Once upon a time, in the heart of a bustling city, there lived a man named Charles, known far and wide for his immense wealth. Charles had everything a man could ever desire: a sprawling mansion, luxury cars, a thriving business empire, and a beautiful wife named Clara. However, despite all the luxuries, there was one thing that troubled Clara. Charles had never expressed any desire to have children. From the moment they were married, Clara had dreamed of starting a family with Charles, filling their grand home with the laughter of children. But each time she brought up the topic of children, Charles would quickly dismiss it. "I don't think it's a good idea for us to have biological children," he would say. "This world is too harsh, and I don't want to bring our own flesh and blood into it." Clara was confused and heartbroken. She couldn't understand why Charles would be so adamantly against having kids of their own. Still, she loved him dearly and respected his decision, but the emptiness gnawed at her heart every day. Then one evening, Charles came home with a surprising suggestion. "Clara," he began as they sat down for dinner, "I've been thinking, perhaps instead of having our own children, we could adopt 10 children who are in need of a good home. There are so many orphans out there who have no one to love them. We can provide them with everything they need and raise them as our own. Isn't that just as fulfilling?" Clara's heart softened at the thought. Charles had always been so generous, so kind, and now his willingness to adopt 10 children made her believe that he still had the capacity for fatherhood in a different way. She was touched by his words and finally agreed. A few weeks later, Charles and Clara began the process of adoption. They chose 10 children from different orphanages, each one with a unique story of hardship and suffering. Clara was excited to give them a fresh start and a loving home. But unknown to Clara, there was a dark secret behind Charles's sudden change of heart. Years ago, when Charles was a young man struggling to make his way in the world, he had crossed paths with a mysterious old man known only as Mr. Reynolds. The man had a reputation for knowing how to make people incredibly wealthy, but his services came at a steep price. One's soul or body, desperate to escape his poverty and rise to the top, Charles had sought Mr. Reynolds out. "I want wealth beyond imagination," Charles had demanded. Mr. Reynolds agreed, but with a chilling condition. "You will have wealth," the old man said, "but you must sacrifice your manhood. You will never father a child of your own, and you must never speak of this deal to anyone. If you do, everything will be taken from you." Charles, blinded by his greed, agreed without hesitation. From that day forward, his fortunes turned around, and he built his empire. But as time passed, Clara's desire for children threatened to unravel his carefully hidden secret. With the adoption of the children, life in the mansion seemed perfect. Clara was overjoyed and devoted her life to raising them, showering them with love and care. Yet, Charles kept his distance from the children, often disappearing for days on business trips or locking himself away in his study. Clara noticed his growing detachment, but every time she questioned him, he would brush her off, claiming that he was busy with work. Despite the wealth and luxury, something always felt off to Clara. Children were happy, but there was a strange coldness in the house, a lurking shadow that seemed to grow with each passing day. One evening, as Clara was tucking the children into bed, she overheard 2 of them whispering about their nightmares. Nightmares of a man in a cloak who would stand at the foot of their beds, watching them in the dark. Disturbed, Clara confronted Charles. "The children are having horrible nightmares," she said. "Is there something going on that you're not telling me?" Charles, visibly uncomfortable, assured her that it was nothing more than childish imagination. "They're just adjusting to their new life," said dismissively. Clara wasn't convinced. Deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's unease grew. One night, he decided to investigate further. She sneaked into Charles' study while he was away and began searching through his things. Hidden in a locked drawer, she found an old, crumbling letter written in a language she didn't understand. But what caught her eye was the seal at the bottom, a dark, twisted symbol that sent a shiver down her spine. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara took the letter to an old family friend, a historian named Mr. Harold, who had knowledge of ancient texts and symbols. When he saw the letter, his face turned pale. "This is no ordinary letter, Clara," he said gravely. "This is a contract. Contract for one's soul or body. Whoever wrote this has made a deal with something or someone, not of this world." Clara was horrified. "What does it mean?" she asked, voice trembling. "It means that Charles has sacrificed something in exchange for his wealth," Mr. Harold explained. "From the looks of it, he has given up his ability to father children. This explains why he insisted on adopting rather than having his own." Clara felt the world spinning around her. Everything fell into place. Strange behavior, the nightmares, coldness that pervaded their home. She realized with a sinking heart that Charles had made a deal with dark forces long ago, and now they were paying the price. She returned home that night, shaken to her core. She knew she couldn't confront Charles yet, not until she fully understood the extent of his deception. As the shadows of doubt and fear grew larger, Clara vowed to uncover the entire truth, no matter the cost. Clara could barely contain her emotions as she stepped back into the mansion that night. Every corner of the grand house now felt haunted by the darkness of Charles' secret. She tried to maintain her composure around the children, but the burden of knowing what Charles had done weighed heavily on her. Every smile, every laugh of the children seemed to remind her of the truth. Her husband had traded his ability to be a father for wealth. Determined to get more answers, Clara began secretly following Charles. She observed him closely, watching his movements and noting his increasingly strange behavior. She soon discovered that Charles was visiting a secluded cabin in the woods just outside the city, often late at night. Though the trips had become more frequent since the adoption, he never mentioned them to her. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Clara decided to follow him. She waited for Charles to leave, and then quietly trailed him to the cabin. Hidden behind some trees, Clara watched as Charles entered the dark structure and disappeared inside. She waited for what felt like hours, and then, just as she was about to give up and head back home, the door opened again. This time, Charles wasn't alone. A tall, shadowy figure stood next to him, cloaked in black robes. Clara couldn't make out the figure's face, but there was something deeply unsettling about its presence. The air seemed to grow colder around them. She strained to hear their conversation, but could only catch fragments of words, enough to make her blood run cold. "You must continue," the shadowy figure said in a deep, raspy voice. "The children serve their purpose, but there is still more to be done." Charles looked nervous, his hands trembling as he nodded. "I've done everything you've asked," he stammered. "Isn't it enough? I gave up my manhood, my chance at a family." The figure laughed darkly. "Wealth comes with a price, Charles. Your sacrifice was just the beginning. If you want to keep what you have, you will obey. Failure to comply will result in consequences far worse than you can imagine." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she listened. She realized with horror that Charles was still bound by the deal he had made. Not only had he sacrificed his manhood for wealth, but the adoption of the children seemed to be part of some larger, more sinister plan. Unable to bear any more, Clara slipped away, hurrying back to the mansion. Once inside, she locked herself in her room, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. What was Charles doing with the children? What was their purpose in this twisted scheme? And more importantly, how could she protect them? The following days were a blur. Clara kept her discovery to herself, struggling with the decision of whether or not to confront Charles. She watched him closely, noting how his demeanor shifted from charming and loving to cold and distant. It became clear that whatever deal Charles had made, it was starting to take its toll on him. His once confident posture was now hunched, and dark circles appeared under his eyes. One night, Clara finally decided to confront him. She couldn't bear the lies any longer, nor could she let the children remain in danger. After dinner, once the children were asleep, Clara approached Charles in his study. "I know what you did," she said, her voice steady but filled with tension. Charles, sitting behind his massive desk, froze. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though the panic was evident in his eyes. "I know about your deal with Mr. Reynolds," Clara continued, stepping closer. "I know you sacrificed your ability to father children for wealth. You lied to me, Charles. You didn't want to adopt out of kindness. You did it because of some twisted obligation to keep your fortune." Charles stood up abruptly, his face pale. Clara, you don't understand. No, I do, she interrupted, her voice rising. You've put us all in danger. What are you doing with those children, Charles? What is the real reason you brought them here? For a moment, Charles said nothing, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he sat back down and buried his face in his hand. I didn't want this, he whispered. I didn't want any of this. Then why? Clara pressed, her voice softening. Why did you make that deal? I was desperate, Charles admitted. I wanted power, success, everything I thought would make my life worth living. When I met Mr. Reynolds, he offered me all of that in exchange for my manhood. I thought I could live with that, but I didn't realize there would be more demands. Clara shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. And the children? Charles's expression darkened. They're part of the deal. Mr. Reynolds requires me to adopt 10 children and raise them in my household. He didn't explain why, but I couldn't refuse. If I break the terms of the contract, I lose everything. Clara felt sick. You've put those innocent children at risk for the sake of your wealth? I didn't know what else to do, Charles shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. If I refuse, Mr. Reynolds will take it all away, and who knows what he'll do to us. I'm trapped, Clara. We're both trapped. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of the truth pressing down on Clara's chest. She felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and pity for the man she had once loved so dearly. He had chosen wealth over everything else, and now they were all paying the price. But Clara wasn't willing to let things continue as they were. She stood tall, her mind made up. We have to break the deal, Charles. We have to find a way to stop this before it's too late. Charles looked at her, his eyes filled with hopelessness. There's no way out, Clara. Mr. Reynolds controls everything. We try to defy him, we may lose the wealth. Clara replied, her voice firm, but we'll save the children and ourselves. I'm not afraid to start over if it means protecting our family. Charles hesitated, clearly torn between his desire for power and the love he still had for Clara. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. I don't know how we'll do it, but I'll try. For you and for the children. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they would fight to break the dark pact that had ensnared their lives, even if it meant sacrificing everything they had built. The battle for their future had just begun.